Paul writes the letter of Galatians to Gentile believers he converted on his first missionary journey, urging them to reject the false gospel of Judaizing missionaries, this gospel of justification by works, epitomized by the act of circumcision. And the first step that Paul takes to defend his gospel, a gospel of justification by faith, is to demonstrate that it is not his gospel. It is God's gospel. Paul didn't make it up. It was revealed to him by God himself. And Paul's going to do this by laying out exactly where he went from the moment of his conversion down to the present moment. And Paul's going to open up this section with the thesis statement, his thesis statement of this first argument, that his gospel is not man's gospel. Let's look at that thesis statement for the opening argument that Paul uses. Down in verse 11, for I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me to you guys in Galatia when I showed up, that's not man's gospel. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation from Jesus Christ himself. So that's step one. That's the first part of this argument. It's this gospel was received by revelation from God. The second step in this argument is to demonstrate that this gospel was not changed, was not altered or added to or manipulated in any way. So he's going to use these next three locations to make that point, saying that after he received this gospel, he went away into Arabia for 3 years. It said that he did not consult anyone, but he went away to Arabia for 3 years. No one changed the gospel. And then after those 3 years, he went to Jerusalem, but he was only in Jerusalem for 15 days. He only saw Peter and James. And he makes the point again that no one manipulated him or convinced him to change his gospel. It remained unaltered. And then finally, the same point is made with this fourth stay. He spends another 11 years in Syria. And it says that during which time he was still unknown to the brothers in Judea. His gospel was untampered with. And finally, after these 14 years, he goes to Jerusalem and he sets before all of the apostles the gospel that he has been preaching to the Gentiles, specifically in Antioch only at this time. And let's see how the apostles respond to this gospel that Paul's been preaching. So here we are, chapter 2. After these 14 years, he went to Jerusalem and he set before the apostles the gospel that he had been proclaiming in Antioch. And in verse 6, it says that these influential guys added nothing to me. They altered my gospel in no way. On the contrary, when they perceived the grace that was given to me, they extended the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, saying, hey, you guys, you preach that same gospel to the Gentiles, and we're going to continue preaching it to the Jews. You're cool by me, Paul. And he's accepted by the apostles. And the proof, Paul's proof that this gospel, which was accepted by the apostles in Jerusalem, is Paul's same gospel of justification by faith apart from works of the law. His proof is that even Titus, a Gentile who came with him to Jerusalem, Titus was not forced to be circumcised by the apostles. Paul's gospel, revealed to him by God, was accepted by the apostles and is justification by faith apart from the works of the law. You can look at chapter 2, verse 3 for that final point. Now, stop number 6, Antioch. Things are going to get a little bit intense here in Antioch. So this city is where Paul did most of his early ministry. It's the first multi-ethnic church composed of Jews and Gentiles mingling together. This is Paul's dream. And at some point, Peter is going to visit this church in Antioch. And at first, and everything's going to go great. He's eating bacon with the Gentiles. He's laughing, slapping them on the back. Yeah, I walked on water once, didn't go so well. Everything's going great. But then members of the circumcision party are going to show up. They're going to, kick down the door and walk in. And Peter, he's going to get a little bit nervous. This bacon burrito that he's eating, he's going to quickly throw it under the table and separate himself from the Gentiles. And Paul, who's observing this reaction in Peter, it says that he will oppose Peter. He says, I opposed Peter to his face because of his hypocrisy. And let's take a look at this intense moment here in Antioch. Look at this, 2 apostles battling it out. Oh man. Okay. 2 verse 12. Here we are. Peter came to Antioch, and at first he's eating with the Gentiles, bacon burrito, but then he drew back and separated himself when men from James, members of the circumcision party, came, because he was fearing the circumcision party. And Paul opposed Peter to his face. And he says, and we have to follow this closely because it's kind of dense argumentation. Paul is going to say to Peter, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, that is, you do not keep the Mosaic law, you're eating a bacon burrito. If you do that one moment, how can you the very next moment force Gentiles to live like Jews and say that you have to obey the laws of the food laws in the Mosaic law? Is that making sense? And there's some debate about when this rebuke, Paul's rebuke of Peter, when it ends. And the ESV, they're kind of going to show their hand a little bit and say, well, I think that rebuke ends at verse 14, just with this first argument. But I think that there's a good argument to be made that Paul's rebuke of Peter extends all the way down to the end of chapter 2. And let me show you what I mean by that. So here's Paul's rebuke of Peter, and I think it probably goes all the way down here. And my reasoning is this we statement here. Paul says, we ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentiles. Who's he talking to? I mean, he's not talking to the Galatians. They're Gentiles. He has to be talking still to Peter as a continuation of this rebuke. We, Peter and Paul, we are Jews and not Gentile sinners. And this little phrase is important. Sinners, he's probably getting at this idea of those who do not keep the law of Moses, bacon burrito eaters. So we are Jews, not those who do not keep the Mosaic law. And then he says, but if in our endeavor to be justified by Christ, we, Peter and Paul, are found to be sinners, that is, we do not keep the Mosaic law, we become all things to all men, to those who are not under the law, we become like those who are not under the law. If we are found to be sinners, does that mean that our gospel creates more sinners? No, Paul says. Look at verse 18. For if I rebuild what I tore down, the requirement to keep the laws of Moses, that requirement was torn down. If I rebuild it by insisting again that Gentiles must keep the law of Moses, well, then I prove myself to be a transgressor because I'm eating bacon over here. I'm a sinner like the Gentiles formerly. But Paul says, no, this is his reasoning, I've been crucified with Christ. So when I was crucified with Christ, Paul says, I died to the law. I died to the law in order that I may live by faith. And that is Paul's gospel. Died to the law, therefore do not rebuild this necessity to be under the law. This gospel is God's gospel, and it was not changed. Nobody changed it, not even Peter himself. Now, next, in Paul's second argument here in this large section, he is going to explain why this era of the law was torn down, and so that now we can live by faith in Christ in the new covenant age. He's going to talk about that change in redemptive history in his second argument.